Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Moore Center. I'm George Linebaugh. I'm the president of the Union Salmon Association. Probably some of you haven't heard of that, but we've been around for over 30 years. We started out with a group of anglers dissatisfied with going with the first FERC licensing on the dam in Ellsworth. So this is why this has been an ongoing saga now for almost 7 years. And this is why we want to hold this informational meeting to bring everybody up to speed. One other thing a little note that the Ellsworth Green Party is having their chapter, or the connecting with our Union River, now be on the weekend of the 7th, and that. So there's some brochures there in the back if anybody's interested. So without further ado, I'll introduce Dwayne Shaw, Executive Director of Downeast Salmon Federation, to finish up the summer program. We'll have questions afterwards.
Thanks, George. And just so everybody knows, we're being recorded, and that's part of the program tonight. This is not being Zoomed, so there were a lot of requests for information, so we'll be sharing that recording with people. Part of the intention of the evening was to have a conversation, not just to hear from me, from Downeast Salmon Federation. So I'm going to try to make this part brief, give you the update, and then there's a lot of people in the room that have been deeply involved with this for years. Like George said, this relicensing, I was just looking at some documents. The earliest ones I see from this relicensing are over 10 years ago. So this one phase, the Union Salmon Association was involved beginning 40 years ago with the last time these structures were relicensed. And we can talk about that and what didn't happen then and now and what may happen going forward. So just briefly, a few logistics. I guess if you were a fish and you're looking at the river, it would be kind of cut off like that because there's a problem out in this river. We've got some technology problems too. So don't anybody pull on that screen, whatever you do. Don't do that, and don't finish with that. So we've got half of this. Sorry, but that's all we've got. So Downeast Salmon Federation is a Washington County-based organization. It was started 41 years ago by anglers, salmon anglers, particularly from the Downeast River Sportsman's Club, the Two Rivers Salmon Club, which was Machias, East Machias, and the Pleasant River Fish and Game Conservation Association, and the Narragansett Salmon Association. So those were the 5 Washington County salmon rivers that got together and said, we've got to do something for ourselves. People from outside the region aren't caring for the rivers as well as what they need to be. The agencies have limitations and so on. So that's how it gets started. And then the Union Salmon Association gets started right around the same time. So we've been working closely with USA, Union Salmon Association, for all those years. So why is the Washington County group down here in Hancock County talking about this? We decided when this licensing came up that we really need to step up because there wasn't the capacity down here to do what we've done for the last now 10 years to advocate for proper watershed management, water levels, water quality, and migratory fish. So there's a number of us in the room that are DSF members, some staff, board members, and so on. I'm not going to introduce everybody, but I'll just say, if you're a board member, raise your hand. Okay, we have 4 board members. Other employee of Downeast Salmon Federation, we got one here. Past employee, Brett's over there. Some of you know Brett. And let's see, there's a bunch of you are also supporters and members and so on, so thank you for your support. This is a long game, right? We've been around for 40 years. We run 2 hatcheries. We're stocking 3 rivers right now with wild Atlantic salmon, East Machias, Pleasant, Narragansett, and we've been asked to stock fish into the Union. and we can talk about why it isn't being stocked currently with Atlantic salmon because of the dams, but there's some details we can talk about. We run a land trust. We've just become an accredited land trust, so we have 6,000 acres of land along rivers, streams, and lakes. That's what we focus on. Public access. We do educational programs. We do advocacy work, which means going to Augusta occasionally. 5 of us just came back from Augusta just literally a moment ago. We got here just in time from a hearing about interactions between fish, native fish and wild fish, and how should our watersheds be managed, and what kind of fish do we want, all those types of details. Sometimes that gets worked out in the legislature, sometimes it gets worked out at other levels. So the mission, and I'll read the bottom part to you here as well, to conserve wild Atlantic salmon and habitat, restore viable sports fishery. That's a long game, given where we are. Protect other important river, scenic, recreational, and ecological sources of resources in eastern Maine. So Hancock's still part of eastern Maine, the way we looked at it. So we're a community-based, nonprofit conservation group, membership-based. You all should become members if you can. If you're willing to, that would be fantastic. We need your support, and that's how we've done what we've done over the past few years. So this is largely showing the game changed. The last time this dam was relicensed, or these dams, the one license, 2 dams, Grand Lake and the Leonard Lake Dam, or the lower dam. That's 1 license, and what's really changed in the last 40 years is that this has occurred. The salmon, because of mismanagement, really, has now gotten to the point where it's endangered. It's on the federal endangered list. The state of Maine has refused to put it on the state list, even though we've got other types of fish on the list and other animals and so on. But it's been a political hot potato. Since the first dam was built in New England, it's been hot politics around dams and fishways. It's just the way it's been. And that's resulted in us now having endangered species in our community, which if you're a Brookfield, say, or a dam owner, that might be a real headache. And that's how the game changed. 40 years ago, it wasn't a listed species. And now we have a federally listed species that needs to get up and down this river. We have other species, and we can talk about what those other ones are. But as you see, a lot of the state of Maine is in this critical habitat area designated by the federal government for special attention to recover Atlantic salmon. And there are 8 populations left in the United States, and they're all in Maine. And 5 of them are up in Washington County, starting from the Narraguays, going east to the Denny's, including the Denny's. And then the Union has been extirpated, so it means there aren't any, very, very few salmon here now, but the original population is gone. So we could go to the Narraguays and the Penobscot and bring fish in and start a new population. That's what's likely going to happen. So because of the salmon listing, the dam owners have a higher hurdle that they've got to attend to with their licensing. And like I said, a lot of you have been involved with this, and as we get into the conversation, please introduce yourself and the organization and the roles. So there's a Lake Association in Graham, for instance, and some other groups that we really should hear from. The part you can't see is that the white area. So I just showed you that big amoeba, right? The olive area that's a watershed for the salmon, and then within that, where are the populations currently? Not in a lot of places, partly because of dams, and partly, as you can see, there's a lot in the easternmost Maine, and some in the Penobscot, upper Kennebec, that's what you're looking at here. And then there's areas that are completely vacant. Even though it's designated critical habitat, we don't have the capacity of the Craig Brook National Fish Hatchery or the Green Lake Hatchery to put fish in there. And they're not going to come back on their own because there isn't a donor population nearby that's big enough to for them to wander in from. So we need hatcheries, unfortunately, in this equation around salmon. But it's not only salmon that we're talking about here, all of the sea-run fish. So this native suite of sea-run diadromous fish, which means they have to go between fresh and salt water to fulfill their life cycle. If they don't, they're done. So you're looking at, there's a short-nosed sturgeon down below that you're not seeing, and there's sea-run brook trout. So it's 12 species that if you don't provide them access, they're done. And this river once had all of these fish, and some of them are still here, and they're down below the dam. Like the smelt can spawn right at the head tide, for instance, and the tomcod. So it's not just the dam itself as a physical structure that's a problem for these fish, but it's the water quality. So there's the lower dam, and that's the quality of the water that you're seeing in this river at this point. Pretty muddy and low in oxygen, as it turns out. And the reason for that is because of the upper dam. But between the dams, you've got a stream that comes in, Branch Lake Stream. That is the drinking water supply for the city of Ellsworth up there at Branch Lake. And you can see the quality of the water that's coming into the main stem of the river. So the mud that's coming as a result of wind action on the bottom of Graham Lake when it's drawn down low and so on, all comes downstream, and it's impairing, which is the legal term from EPA, that whole river segment, and because of this mud. And obviously the cold water fish, like trout and salmon, they're going to love Branch Lake Stream. And we just, working with the city of Ellsworth, took a little dam out that was right there a couple of years ago. Another problem with this dam, there's two dams. They're on one license, owned by one owner, Brookfield, and they're a Canadian-based, multinational, very large company. When they get them, what they do is they manage the water coming down for hydro generation. And the hydro generation, the power generation is at the lower dam, not at the upper dam at all. They just store water up above at Graham, they let it down through, comes through very muddy, comes with fish, out migrating alewives, and these are the baby alewives, and they go through the turbines. Or they go down and bounce off the rocks at the bottom of the dam. And we've been documenting this mortalities, and we see mortalities of out migrating eels. So there's a few species of migrating fish that are getting up. Trap and truck is one method. Eels squirm and do everything they can to get up and around. So there's issues with just outright fish mortality. And of course, you might recognize this. This is not the clam flats and cutler. These are the flats in upriver here at Graham Lake. When the water gets drawn down, which is legal, so under the current license, the owner is allowed over 11 feet of water whenever they want, essentially. So they have a minimum discharge. In the summer, they have to allow so much to come out of the dam, but for their hydro generation, which is their prime reason for being, they can draw this down. It's like a big battery bank for them, if you think of it that way. This is where they store all the energy, and when the price goes up, they pull water out, they generate power, and they sell it. And what is in debate currently is not only the fish passage and the water quality, but also the lake levels and the associated water quality and aquatic life in the lake. I only have a couple slides, so then I'll give you the update. So, this isn't the first rodeo on the Union River. We talked about 40 years ago, there was a big debate, which ended up in the courts, by the way, And U.S. Fish and Wildlife was in court against then Bangor Hydro, saying you've got to get a fishway in this place, and you've got to have downstream passage to prevent these fish kills. Well, they lost. U.S. Fish lost. They weren't prepared. They didn't have the data. They didn't show that there was an actual enough effort underway, so they lost. But going way back into time, and this is something that Brett dug up out of the newspaper, 1898, fishways in the Union River, big debates, even back then. And in '07, when the dam was built, it was built without a fishway. So it was the largest dam and tallest dam, power generating dam in New England when it was built. It was an engineering miracle. That's absolutely the case. They forgot one really important thing, and that's the fishway. And people fought over it, and it persists to this day without a fishway. In the 70s, they put in a little trap, so that now we have a trap and truck system for moving fish up and around. And if it's a salmon, they get trucked way up on top of Grand Lake, put in the river up that way. If it's the alewives, they get put into Graham and some in Leonard, and maybe, I think that's it at this point. So it's far from perfect in our opinion, and I think all the agencies have weighed in to say the same thing. So, you know what happens if I go there? Okay. So that's some background. That's who DSF is, some of what's been in play, and then just to go into the licensing part of this. So there's the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. They issue licenses for use of the surface waters of the United States for power generation. That's their job. And they're supposed to balance the needs of the environment with the needs for power generation. And they have to, however, work closely with the fisheries agencies and the other natural resource agencies. So they take input from all angles on the whole topic. But there's certain things that have to be put in place. And one of them is a certification for water quality under the EPA's Clean Water Act, so called the 401 permit, and that is issued through Maine DEP. So it comes, the Clean Water Act is administered through DEP. DEP has said, in this case, you've applied, you've asked for essentially status quo to begin with, and we're saying, no, you're not going to get that, and your system, as you have it in the way in which you're managing it, and the way you propose to manage going forward, is not to the standards, today's standards. And DEP made that statement formally. Brookfield then appealed, and there's some, the details of the formal denial of the water quality certification was based on water quality, water levels, and the life standards of the stream not being met. So with the lake, the river, and then another lake, and they're measuring all of those pieces, and they're saying no to Grand Lake in the way you want to manage that, no to the way the river's being managed in between, and no to Leonard Lake in the way that it's currently being managed. You're out of compliance, and you're going to have to make some major adjustments. So Brookfield said, well, we can appeal. So they did, to the Board of Environmental Protection. So the Board of Environmental Protection. So this is not FERC. FERC's federal. This is state level. At the state level, the Board of Environmental Protection heard the arguments coming from the staff at DEP, and they said, you're right. They're out of compliance. We uphold your, the staff recommendations around this. And we've been weighing in all through this process, and many of you have as well, with letters and petitions and commentaries in the press and all kinds of ways in which a number of you have been involved. And the state's been listening to that, so is FERC, and so are the fisheries agencies. So when DEP staff said no. They appealed. They went to the Board of Environmental Protection, which is more of a political mechanism for balancing these things at the state level. The Board of Environmental Protection said no. So now Brookfield went to Superior Court. And the basis of their appeal, which the Attorney General then said to the court, we want you to dismiss this on there being no grounds for their appeal. So the point that they chose to appeal on was the Class B standard of Leonard Lake. So below, just above the lower dam, 100-acre lake does not have the oxygen content that it should have under the law, which is the classification, which is a AA, A, B, C, and SC, I think, on the title one. So they said, you're going to have to change your application because you can't manage it the way you're managing it, and it's not meeting the standards. So the court took the argument, and they accepted information from the state. The Attorney General's office weighed in, provided the information, and then DSF joined us as an intervener. So we have a formal standing in this process. We're lawyered up. It's costing us money. We could use some help with that. We do have some low bono, pro bono attorneys involved, but even low bono is still expensive. So now, because of COVID, again, delays, the court system is so backed up that it's going to be into April, May, June before the judge will look at this and determine, if they'll accept Brookfield's argument that this really should not be classified as B, which gets into the details of did the state represent it correctly in all of the process that you have to do. And the AG's office is saying, yes, we did. A DEP official at some point might have said in public that it was actually C standards or something, but when you look at the documents that are the overarching determination, it says B, and Brookfield, you should have known that. So that's kind of where that stands. And FERC, meanwhile, the fisheries agencies, and I'm talking about the sea-run fish agencies, particularly in this case, and at the federal level, you have NOAA Fisheries and you have U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and they both have authority over the Endangered Species Act and doing weighing in on these licenses. And in the case of NOAA, they've said to the applicant, as soon as you get a license, in that license, you're going to have a requirement to put in downstream passage within 3 years. So that's not cheap. It's going to cost them money. And they anticipated that, I'm sure. And the reason that they're going to wait 3 years is because we're going to have a stocking program where we put fish in there, salmon, right? And stock, and they're going to start showing up. And you're going to have 3 years to build this thing. There's alewives here as well. And you're going to divert your fish by. They're going to go to sea for a couple of years. And as that population builds, we're going to give you 15 years to build your fish lift. So it's going to be a fish elevator is probably the prescription for this. 15 years down the road. We're hoping that they would accelerate that in the news soon. So on the Kennebec, there are lawsuits flying back and forth around 4 dams that Brookfield owns down there on the main stem of Kennebec. You may have heard the news yesterday on the dam at Milford on the Penobscot. The Fishway there that was built is not working properly. The salmon are being delayed, and there may be some changes, some new investments that have to be made there. So these facilities are not perfect, but they have to be held to a standard. So even if you build it, they still, the agencies are still watching to make sure that it gets built properly and it actually works. So those are the updates. It's like slow molasses waiting for the courts. The courts are way behind. But in April, both the state and the intervener, DSF, will have to respond to those things that Brookfield brings forward. All of the parties had agreed to use what was currently in the record, I believe, is the way that they've chosen to handle this at this point. So that's helpful. I'm sure I'm forgetting a bunch of things. If anybody wants to pipe in, Brett's had his hands deep in this. I know Mark has, and other folks. Feel free to jump in and remind me of other things.
I just have a question. What role have the towns played in all of this? And are there towns that are supportive of better fish passing?
Yeah, so there's a number of towns right along the river and on the river and on the, like impoundments with Grand Lake being impounded behind the dam. And the towns have issued statements, especially around water level, wanting those water levels to be managed more like a normal or a natural lake. So there have been statements along those lines. The city of Ellsworth, I'm trying to remember if they've issued anything specifically. And again, if somebody has any thoughts around that.
I think the city Ellsworth intervened in the FERC process a couple of years ago, but I think it was just to stay active. And the Hancock County Commissioners, though, did file, I think, a statement of some kind, where they supported fish passage a few years ago. Those are some of the formal things, I think, locally.
Yeah. Passamaquoddy tribe did as well. So, there's been participation, but not at the levels that it could be, certainly. I think most, in the case of, one thing that's unique here is that there's also an Alewife Harvest, a commercial harvest for alewives, which is made possible by the trap and truck system. So it's roughly 1 million alewives a year, which are both blueback herring and alewives combined, that come to the dam. Those are only there because that population was restarted by a stocking program years ago. And the city has benefited from that, and they harvest a significant amount of alewives that most, largely go for lobster bait. So there's a revenue source to the city. We know that could be a lot larger, maybe 7 times the scale of what it is now. And of course, there's an elver fishery, so the young eels that get captured below the dam in the estuary, the lower part of the river, downtown Ellsworth. The value of the eels alone, probably caught in this river system, likely surpasses the amount of energy that's generated and the value of it. So when you start to look at fish values and a recovered fishery, it's really significant to the region and community. That's just this one river. So in combination, and this is kind of the much broader picture, is what many of us are working on, is trying to reconnect our rivers to the sea and the lakes and ponds and streams to the sea the way that they naturally occurred, and to allow for those fish populations that naturally occurred here to rebound as best as they can. And we can assist that. And there's lots of different ways that we can do that. But first and foremost, they have to get there, right? So whether it's a culvert that's too high in the stream and the fish can't get up through it, it's like a miniature dam, or 70-foot tall dam like this, the fish have to get there. When you look at that cumulatively across from St. Croix to the Bagaduce, say, the whole of this region, Castine to Calais, we say. If you were to fix all of that and let those fish really flourish there again, those sea-run fish, they become the base of a very big food web that feeds everything from seals and otters to eagles and halibut and codfish and so on. So it's, it's a big interconnected natural system that's been interrupted significantly. And some simple things that we can do. And we have some examples of other dams that we've worked on, and we can talk about that. But the FERC process is held up at the moment because of the 401 process, so this state DEP certification. And I think that, the community conversation around this, whether you're from Mariahville or whatever town you may be involved with in the region, there's a lot of weight that the municipal governments can bring to this, and particularly the city of Ellsworth, of course. As the fish harvest location for the alewives, that's really important. There are scenarios in other places that are being looked at. The recreational asset that is submerged below the lower dam. So there's 100 acres of dead water there that's behind that dam. There is a recreational whitewater facility waiting to be dewatered, brought back to more of a natural state. There's a possibility that if that lower dam were removed and the Grand Lake Dam were managed to provide water for recreational flows, so-called, which could be built into the license, there could be a recreational whitewater capacity there for that. And we've sort of mapped that all out. We have historical information. We've had some fancy fish finders, mapping all the bottom of the lake. So we've got an idea of what's there. Class 3 whitewater in downtown Ellsworth, with that could be, very valuable to the community. We've also run some numbers on the replacement of the energy. So how many acres of solar panels would it take to replace the energy generated here? Somewhere on the order of about 60 acres, I think were the numbers that we had. Of course, the sun only runs during the daytime. With water power, you can turn it on at night if you want to, and the market goes up, or what have you. So it's different, but with battery technology, so this is another piece of this that's new in the last 10 years, really. Battery technology has really become pretty robust, and we're seeing some installations in Maine, both for whatever power generation, store that energy, and then put it on the market later. So.
Dwayne, to clear up some confusion, is DSF advocating the dam removal at Leonard's?
We have not advocated for that. We're advocating for gold standard fish passage at both these dams. Brookfield has said, well, if you're going to make us invest in fish passage, we don't know if we want to stick around. And we've said, well, there's other things that can be done with this river, and no one else is stepping up to the plate to buy them out, apparently. But so we hold that option open. But Graham Lake is not. We have not said at all, and this, just to say this twice, we're not advocating for the removal of the Graham Lake Dam. Downeast Salmon Federation is not advocating for the removal of the Graham Lake Dam. I haven't heard anyone say that they want the Grand Lake Dam removed. What we are saying is we want gold standard fish passage in there. And it could be managed in a number of different ways by a number of different parties, whether the city or a combination of city and town. It's been done before in other places in Maine. So that could be a possibility. But this lower dam, with the deferred maintenance that's there, the generators still have wooden ball bearings. Okay? This was built in 1907. They're still operating with some very old equipment there. So whether they're ready to make that level of investment is to be determined. We don't know what's going on with their bean counters in Toronto, but, you know, yeah, so that's,
Just to clarify something you said, it sounds like that the water quality issue is a considerable issue as well, but it doesn't sound like any of the current remediation that's being asked for is going to address that. Could you talk to that a little bit?
sure, yeah, it would address that, and part of what Graham Lake, when I said those Cutler clam flats, you know, if you keep that lake at a steady state, like a natural lake in Maine, 2 to 3 foot of, you know, variation, then you get vegetation growing, and right now vegetation can't grow in there. Freshwater mussels are dying by the tens of thousands, if not more, every time they draw that down or the ice sits on them and so on. So by stabilizing that lake, so that's the way that would be addressed.
Is that part of the current licensing
It is.
negotiations?
Yeah, so that's what DEP said in their feedback to Brookfield. You're going to stabilize this lake level much more like a natural lake, which will allow vegetation to grow in there, which will stabilize all those sediments that you now see blowing out into Union Bay. That can't go on anymore. And that sediment is going down in the river segment between Graham and Leonard. You've got this river, which is salmon habitat. Riffle runs, you know, and all of that, but it's getting embedded with sediment from up above. So the mayflies don't live in that if it's all full of muck and all of that. So that's in violation. The lake is in violation. And then the lower lake with its, because of the oxygen levels, is also.
When you showed the slide of the mud flats, excuse me, Graham Lake, is that a particular time of year when they draw it down, or can be any time?
Can be any time. And they've drawn it down in the middle of the winter with a lot, you know, 2 or 3 feet of ice on it. Draw it down, the ice is now sitting on the bottom. And we've seen documentation of crushed turtles, crushed mussels, and so on. And of course, that ice sliding around.
I was thinking of
So-
Alewife spawning habitat, if the Alewife spawn.
Yeah,
middle of the day.
middle of the summer, they can take it whenever they want, but they do have a minimum, and they do have a problem that they probably hadn't foreseen entirely, and that was with the rain that we're having now, more coming in the fall, less in the middle of the summer. They're under an order to have a minimum discharge from Graham Lake at all times, to keep the river wet down below. And if there's less water coming in at the top end through all the tributaries, then it has to go out. Plus you have evaporation. They're stuck. They're stuck violating the law on discharge in part because of, but if they were forced to keep it up higher, they would have more water to always keep that lower part of the river wet.
Dwayne, you were just saying earlier, is it possible that it's going to take, they have up to 15 years to get that work done? Say it does go through, they have 3 years, and then it's another 15 years before they even have to put the ladders in? Or
To get it working properly, I think it's been 15 years. And again, Brett's been in the weeds with me on this. I think I got it right.
Yeah, in
Roughly.
15 years from when they get a license, if they get a license. Right.
Yeah.
But one thing to think about, that Dwayne covered a lot of territory in a short time, so there's some detail I think it's worth emphasizing. Brookfield's not saying any of these problems aren't there, so they recognize in this lawsuit, they're not arguing that they're not in violation of water quality standards. They're just arguing one point, that they're saying the standard in downtown Ellsworth is not the right standard. But Grand Lake, the river, they're not arguing those points. They're comfortable with, they're aware that their management contributes to impairment in the river, and they could change it tomorrow. But because of the way the law works, they have a license that they can keep getting the same license they were issued in the 1980s, before the standards were updated, before we knew certain things about the waterway. You know, they're not in any way anything more than a financial entity. They're, you know, Brookfield Renewables owned by a giant hedge fund, functionally real estate investment fund. And that's the way they're going to work. So that 15-year thing is another one of these delays. It's a big debt. It doesn't even guarantee that'll happen.
What percentage of the water going over the dam would need to be consumed for a quality fish ladder? In other words, what percentages are you consuming? Maybe not a gold medal one, but like one in Larky, Scotland. They've got a win-win with both the dam and the fish ladders and stuff.
Yeah.
And it's a big tourist attraction in Scotland. I'm just curious,
Yeah.
do we know what volume of water was short to do it? To make both of them viable? Nobody's against renewable energy if you can solve the other problems, and I'm just kind of curious
Right.
whether you have some sense of, is it all of the water or 10%?
Yeah, I don't know, and I don't know if anybody else has a sense of that, but, you know, if you listened to the news yesterday about Milford, they put in a big, brand-new fishway up there, and the fish aren't using it as effectively as, so they're now talking about, okay, we've got to build another one potentially right next to it. So the volume of water is significant, and the way in which it's built matters. You know, it's got to be attraction. Fish have to be attracted there. So those are the kinds of equations that Brookfield's going to be asking. You know, how much water is going to go this way to make these fish happy? But it's significant, no doubt.
I know that lawsuit in Milford is pretty new, but do you foresee that impacting the union and the NOAA fisheries recommendations on the design for upstream fish passage?
I think it could, and partly what we see happening is that the Mills administration is putting a little pressure on that, and whether prior administrations would have just as much, it's hard to say. But in this case, Brookfield owns most of the hydro generation in the state right now, something like 90% or something like that. So they're a big, big player, and they came walking in and saying, well, we'll show you how this is done. These things are difficult to operate, but we know how to do this, and they bought all these things in packages sometimes. So, and I think they got some runts in the litter, so to speak. They've sort of referred to Union as one of those because it's so old, it's so constrained. So I think it could have bearing, and definitely what NOAA Fisheries is about to do on the Kennebec also is likely to. And I think as Brookfield feels pressure, and this is all like crystal ball, can you understand, their financial model? I don't know. They like to be thought of as a green industry, and if you go on their websites, they'll say all of that. But in the how many black eyes they're willing to take before they decide to do something different is to be determined. But they were pretty sensitive over the fact that we put out pictures of all these eels being chopped to pieces in downtown Ellsworth. We got some pushback as a result of that, and we said, well, these are the facts, and we want the public to know it. And they don't like it, but it doesn't seem to have made a difference yet, and we don't know where that threshold is. When the Penobscot tribe is really chasing them on Milford, and we're giving them a hard time here, and down the Kennebec, there's another problem. There may be some threshold where they say, okay, we're going to work with you truly and be really good neighbors, like what Brett was saying. They could tomorrow change their management if they wanted to. There's nothing preventing that. They say they want to be good neighbors. They've come here to Ellsworth numbers of times saying we're good stewards, we're good neighbors, we care about the input model. But they're generating power as we speak, no doubt. And so, it's, the political pressure and the legal pressure and the sort of formalized authorities that come to bear on this all sort of build up to make a difference ultimately.
I'd like to just say that no matter how much water is going over your dam, if it's dirty water, if it's water that is lacking in oxygen, for example, it doesn't do you any good. And the DEP made it very clear, using the research that they were given, they determined that the cause of the poor water quality was because of the variance in the amounts of water that were draining Grand Lake. I live on Grand Lake, and maybe they have goodwill, but where we live, we have literally had no water in front of our property for approximately 3 to 4 months on average for the last 3 years. No water. And they have goodwill. I don't know who comes out and looks around, but that's my concern. Who's going to mandate the standards of water quality? Who's going to come and enforce it? What good are fish if they can't breathe? The turbidity that's being causes enough problem that the eggs, I believe, I'm not sure which fish it is, help me out here guys, they don't have enough sunlight to hatch. And the standards have been clearly given. They have the exact numbers of what the level of that water needs to be, between 102.5 and 100. DEP said you cannot have more than a 2.5 foot variance, and yet they're continuing to do that. They know that the shoreline, which is referred to as the littoral zone, has to be covered 75%, if I'm correct. Speak up, please, Mark, anytime here.
That's correct.
We've gone to Augusta, we've written letters, we've taken photographs that you wouldn't believe, of landowners with their grandkids up to their thighs in mud. So talk about recreation. I went out in my kayak one day and I was bumping into, the stumps that are down there and dragging in the grass and on and off.
Well, this is where, the municipalities, and I'm aware that the city is going through comprehensive planning right now, so they're about to rewrite their comprehensive plan in the city, thinking about the future. What do we want for our community? And this is a big elephant in the room. I mean, it is right in the middle of the city. It's the main feature. It was the reason the city was settled to begin with. And of course, we're all a product of the Industrial Revolution, right? We all benefited from all of that. And those balancing acts were attempted. Time, we're saying, well, these things probably should have been attended to better, and going forward, so that can be built into a comprehensive plan, which does have significant teeth, and also for the towns upstream, the same thing. One story from East Machias, where we have an office in Hatchery, the town had written a comprehensive plan, and they had worked to take a dam out. It was an old Bangor hydro dam that had been abandoned. The town made the poor decision to accept ownership of it. Best business decision Bangor Hydro ever made. They said, give it to the town, and they took it. Well, years later, they realized that wasn't so wise, and we worked with them and we took that out. But in their comprehensive plan, they said, never again. Not going to be another dam downtown East Machias, even though the history, there have been dozens of dams, and that's how the town was built. And when the state came in and wanted to put in a weir across the river to prevent aquaculture and escape salmon from getting up the river, the town said, we have a comprehensive plan that says no dams, and we consider that a dam. And the only way that that would have been built is if the governor had overruled the town's comprehensive plan. And Governor King said, I won't do that. So the $400,000 that was spent building the weir is all already on the side of the river, ready to go. They sold all the weir components and everything else, and it's gone. And that was because of the comprehensive plan. So these plans can really make a difference, and the community should utilize that tool.
So you said before that the Salmon Federation could use financial help to help pay the lawyers. Could you clarify about how much you might be looking for? And also, what is the task of the lawyers? Are they trying to make it that the dam won't get the license, or that you're going to try to make it the dam will get the license if they also do the fish passage?
Right. So we're saying they should get the license if they do the proper things, just exactly what the state is saying. And so we've been really working closely with the state to reinforce the same messages. But that means that the lawyers have to be there present. Sometimes they're actually giving information to the state wasn't aware of, like the history of, some of the history of the river and so on. We don't know how long this is going to stay in court.
Yeah.
And we may end up in a negotiation with Brookfield is a possibility here. And it's easier for a non-governmental group to go into a negotiation than it is for the state or federal agencies. So that's how things have happened around a lot of dams in the state of Maine in the past. The Knobscot River Restoration Trust, non-governmental group, went into negotiations this gentleman was saying, sort of make the balance, find a win-win. And we're preparing to do that if and when the time comes. So it's hard to say how much this is going to cost. I think we've spent upwards of $55,000 so far throughout this process. And that's not including some of our own staff time to do some of the background and so on. So it's at the scale of thousands of dollars, and we anticipate probably another $20,000 in the next 2 years, I would say, just to be present and able to follow through on this. If this goes back into another application, then we'll be back in again, filing comments. And to do it right, you've really got to do all of this background work that is essentially legalese and precedents in other places and pointing to those precedents. The city of Ellsworth spent a lot of money not too long ago rebuilding the sewage treatment plant because the water classification system had been upgraded. So every so many years, the state of Maine and all the states that have this authority under EPA have to take another look at their water quality standard and then hopefully boost that up. So the city has already done their part in this segment of river to increase the water quality, and Brookfield is refusing to do the same. And so,
Could they be fined in any way, like a financial penalty if they don't do something?
if they don't comply with their existing license, so they do have existing license, and the conditions of that license says certain things about, minimum discharge down the river and how much they can draw the lake down and those things. So they could be in violation there. We've been looking at the fish kills and trying to see if there's a way in which we could approach that as a violation. And it's not very easy to go in that direction. So Clean Water Act is a really important provision. Simply, all it says is fishable, swimmable. Waters of the United States are intended to be fishable and swimmable. Well, if your fish are being chewed up in a hydro plant and your water looks like mud, you might be out of compliance. I don't know if people have other ideas around that. This gentleman.
One, issue is in the Pleasant River in Narragansett and Machias. With the warmer weather, I know salmon are very sensitive, Downeast salmon is sensitive to water temperature. Are you finding, as our climate gets warmer, that you're pretty near the margin of survival for the salmon, or is it still a safety margin? Because I think if you're trying to find a solution, that can weigh into it pretty much.
Sure. Yeah, there's still plenty of cold water. You know, the down east coast is called the cold coast. You know, we have our down east coastal current offshore here that's very cold. That's why there's such good lobstering. And then the aquifers in this region are huge. So there's a lot of groundwater. Even though the air temperature may be changing, the groundwater isn't changing very much at all. And we have a lot of forest cover, which is very helpful for shade. And we're increasingly, you know, we're trying to do our best to keep shade on these places. So we've got a lot of water. It's coming in different ways than it used to. And there's a question: do they have enough cold water to get to it? It's really low drought. Can they go into a spring hole and survive for the 3 weeks until the next rainstorm or something? And we're finding that they will. But definitely the climate change situation is not helping. But Eastern Maine is the coldest of the cold, and we've got a lot of groundwater. You go to the Pleasant River and you look at the water being pumped out for blueberries and so on, they're going down, go down 20 feet and you've got crystal clear, incredible water. In a lot of those places, so we're very fortunate that way. Yes.
Curious about the status of sturgeon in all of this. So you mentioned when you had all of the indigenous species that they either were here or maybe still are, and
Still
I think
are.
they're both federally listed. I don't know about the state level. And
Yeah.
do they need to be moved over the dam, or they don't historically go this far up the river? Or?
I think if that dam were not there, they would probably go up above that, especially the short nose.
Because they will not use a fish lift.
I don't think right.
No, they
The
won't.
fish
There's an
lifted-
anadromous fish lab that's all focused on
Yeah,
how to get sturgeon to
Yeah.
move up any of these passages.
Right.
I don't know if they've been successful.
yeah. We don't think that there was a lot of habitat in this system. Maybe in the estuary is a different type of habitat for them, so the juveniles that may be coming out of the Penobscot, say, are being found in a lot of places. So the Penobscot, the Kennebec, partly thanks to the dam removals, we think it appears that those populations are stabilized and growing as a result. And the St. John River up above here as well. So those are the three big spawning areas. And we are seeing more sturgeon along the Maine coast, probably as a result of that and the water quality. So I don't think we're looking at sturgeon passage here, really. It's salmon, alewife, shad, lamprey. Those are kind of the key species.
But still a sturgeon resource. 2 years ago, Brett found a fragment of sturgeon that was identified by the federal labs right below the dam.
Yeah.
Yeah, when I worked at the Salmon Federation, we would survey the river bottom pretty regularly for dead fish. And we found a piece of sturgeon a couple years ago. And just to think about sort of like who's got their eyes on this, the initial response from the agencies, because it was an endangered fish, was that I was breaking the law by handling this for me below the dam. And through some relationships that Dwayne and I had, a different federal agency was able to license the Salmon Federation to handle those endangered fish, so that we could be doing that kind of collection if it happened again.
Maybe we should be advocating for them.
Yeah.
That's not to say that Brookfield had any culpability in the death of that sturgeon. It's not something that went through the turbine because there were sturgeon above.
Yeah.
No, I was just more curious if they would like to get back up there, and if not, why don't we build that into this
Turbine
licensing?
water could have had something to do with why it wasn't able to survive there.
Yeah. The
Or
fish.
it may have just come with the tide or a gully. It's hard to know.
Yeah, I know in Belfast, they were pinging under that bridge over the Sagasawake, and people were quite surprised.
Yeah,
They were going up there, but they were up there.
well, that's what Passagassawake means, place
Right,
to
but it's in such
spear
a different
sturgeon.
condition now than it was then, like all of them.
Well, we're seeing, this is like Millbridge region there, Pleasant River, Narraguagus area, we're starting to see sturgeon jumping up there. They didn't know what they were. They were coming to us. I had photos sent to me from clam diggers on the flats. What the heck is this? It's like a Dixie cup been taken out of the mud, and a little line where the tail hit the mud. And there's another Dixie cup there and there and there. So they're going around eating, hopefully, green crabs. And until proven otherwise, that's what we're saying. Remove a dam, kill a green crab. Oh, way back there. Yeah. Leslie.
Hi, Dwayne.
Hi.
I just want to make a couple comments. One is that Dwayne brought up about the comprehensive plan that Ellsworth is going to be undertaking. This is a process that goes on for a few years. The city just chose the 8 or 9 people who are going to be on the steering committee, and underneath the steering committee are going to be committees. So if you are a resident of Ellsworth, I would suggest you pay attention over the next 5 or 6 months, see how these committees are going to come together, and if this is a particular interest to you, whatever that committee is going to be that brings it, it's going to be connected to the river, you definitely want to get involved. And the committees are open to everybody. But everybody's got to remember that our comprehensive plan is 14 years old. It is not up to date, and us, like a number of neighboring communities, are also faced with the same issue. So my suggestion is, and I'm on the board of the Union Salmon Association and work with Dwayne and those guys on projects. My suggestion is that if you guys know somebody in another community who's doing a comprehensive plan, this is also an opportunity, because this river affects a huge body of water around here. That's one comment. And the second comment, and Dwayne, maybe you can answer this for me. I'm concerned about the Mills administration. Been very involved in the aquaculture, anti-aquaculture thing in Frenchman Bay. I'm concerned that with Janet Mills' position on the CMP corridor and various things regarding green energy initiatives, that Brookfield with hydropower might fall into some of these clean energy goals that we're trying to meet. And I just feel that as much as we don't want these to be political issues, they are, and that maybe our community and other communities that are kind of faced with this, if it's an appropriate action to take at some point, need to put some heat on these guys. My family for 200 years owned dams in Maine, and we had them in central Maine, and I know that my family for a really long time, zillions of generations, went through all sorts of political rah-rah stuff with governors, and senators, and legislators over these, and these were just these little tiny dams, just, at the entrance to North Pond and East Pond and the Belgrade Lakes, that kind of thing. But I know that it can get really political, and I'm of the mind at this point that if that's a direction that maybe this region of Maine needs to take to shake it up, because I get very concerned about the Mills administration going too straight and narrow. And I'm a Democrat, just so you should So those are my comments.
I think that's, the governor has a lot of sway, obviously, over her commissioners and so on. So the more she hears from you, your feelings about the situation here, and it will have an impact. I believe that. And she's been, the climate action plan that was put forward, starting to think about a lot of this, including the green energy. But this is not green energy when you look at the circumstances altogether. Clearly it isn't. And she needs to be hearing that there can be big problems. I think she's quite aware, and the fact that she's given her commissioners the go-ahead to really kind of tighten the screws on a couple of these processes around the Kennebec dams, for instance, is an indication to me that she's getting some good advice, that it can't be status quo. Even if we're going, we need a better balance. And if we can have our energy generation and fish passage and their profits are just a little bit lower as a result, this is a public asset. The water is owned by all of us, and the fish are as well. So I think that she's trying to make that balance, and the more support she gets, she's going to be able to put that pressure on that much harder. So you gotta let her know what's going on in your town.
I just want to make a huge shout out to you all, you and Brad, because I fish down on the river all the time, and you all have gotten Brookfield's attention. You look at the changes down around the dam where they have no trespassing, please don't come in here, stay away. And I've been out there fishing enough times that they're looking to try to find the dead fish before you guys do.
Awesome.
And I think that's a really interesting pressure point, because, and I'll say to Ellsworth community members, every time you go over the river, look down and see if there are dead fish floating down, because I think that Brookfield is really nervous. I've been down there fishing, and these guys walk down from the dam on either side, just slowly going down. I was like, what are they doing? I was like, no, they're doing Brett's job. So I think they're really sensitive about that. I think our community could help, maybe keep eyes and ears on the river, because that seems to be the thing that they're most nervous about, is the downstream fish kills.
Take pictures.
Pointing that out. It was, there was a whole network of people, and you were among them, that were helping us look. But, the crazy thing is nobody had ever looked before.
Yeah.
And people knew about it. There were people that knew the river or worked for Beggar Hydro and told us stories about it. Of course we knew that this was happening, but nobody ever said anything. And including the state agency people that were supposed to be doing this, unfortunately. So when we did document the first fish kills there, which was only a matter of driving across the bridge and seeing all the seagulls upriver, and saying, okay, what's going on? And it was chopped up eels and all these dead young fish and all of that. We chose to make a big deal out of it and go publicly with it. And we knew how to use the system, the FERC system and all this, to say, okay, we've documented it, did it all the proper way, submitted all the information, and FERC responded. So it was right up above the state, and FERC said, okay, you are going to do these studies. The state had asked for a number of studies in this process, and they said, oh, you can do that, through computer model. You don't have to actually go out and do the study. And as soon as we found these fish kills, they forced Brookfield to do the actual studies that need to be done and document the true numbers of mortalities and all of that. And then they forced them to go and do these, documenting it. And then we checked our numbers against their numbers and found that they weren't quite as motivated as we were. So we were out there first, and we could see things that they weren't putting in their records. So thanks to help from a bunch of people. So yes, that kind of thing has been very effective, and it's changed their management some of the dams already. So they're having to close down for a certain period of time to let the adult eels out, and they're turning off certain turbines because of this. So we've had an impact on, and both on their bottom line and on their PR and so on. So it's and no one had done it. It's really quite remarkable that in the last licensing, all these decades, Nobody had gone down, and I said, well, why are all these dead eels on mooring chains downtown? Because they're all coming down, and they might not die immediately, but by the time they get downtown, they're wrapped around everybody's mooring chain. And the harbor master knew it, but he didn't know how to document it and who to talk to and so on. Well, we now have all that information.
And Brett was doing most of the diving at the base of the dam, and only once they threatened him with arrest.
Only once.
Yeah. Brett was down there and they called the police. Police came down and said, well, you're just swimming. It's not against the law. And the underwater camera and snorkel and the whole thing, and there's layers of dead fish on the bottom of the river. It's a stinking mess. It's really quite horrible.
It was Dottie Small came down, she came down and said, asked why they were concerned, and the Brookfield guy said it was for my own safety because the dam could overtop at any moment. She looked at him and said, is that really a danger? Like, should we tell the town? Because so bad. And he stormed off.
You know, there is one fascinating fact about these dams, and this is, many of you probably know this, but when Graham Lake Dam was built in 23 or 5 or whatever, it washed out the very first year, and all that water came down through town, went right up and over this dam. This dam survived it down here, but it took Route 1 bridge out, took the wharves out, took buildings off their foundations. I believe it's still the biggest man-made disaster in Maine's history in dollars and cents. So they came back in and they rebuilt it, and they did it much better, and it's been there, but they've had to continue to invest in it. Somebody was going to say something.
I was just saying, yeah, the people did die during that, I think, right?
Died during that. It was a big deal.
Yeah, I just add to what Leslie said, that another way to be involved in the comprehensive planning process over the next couple of years here in Ellsworth, if you're afraid of being on a committee, which I think I would be, so I hope you all will be, but if you're like me, you don't want to be a committee, there could be a number of listening sessions, and those are really important opportunities for people, not just who are Ellsworth citizens, but who have an involvement and interest in Union River. Kind of stretches throughout. What happens here really affects all these surrounding communities. So look out for those listening sessions and come to those and weigh in, because I think we all know what huge impact recreation and clean water and whitewater and fishing can have on improving and returning this community to why it's here. But we need to speak up so that it gets more of an emphasis, and that our city government can kind of recognize how important this is to all of us as well.
We just came from Augusta. A number of us testifying on a bill there about salmon. And Nicole Grahowski, Senator Grahowski, was there, and she couldn't escape. She sends her apology. I'm not sure what she's involved with down there, but she was very curious about the recording, and she'll be watching that later. She's been deeply involved with this. She's deeply involved in energy issues as well, so I think she's a resource to turn to around some of the questions about green energy and hydro and so on. Is there anyone else? I know some. Ed?
I'm Eddie Dan, and you might know that there's two different groups on Graham Lake. There's the Friends of Graham Lake and the Graham Lake Upper Union River group. And so you can find them both on Facebook. But we've also lived on Graham Lake for 20 years. So we've seen the ups, we've seen the downs. When it's up, when it's up in the spring, we lose about 300 cubic feet of land every spring. And come September, October, we got an extra 6 acres. Well, but that doesn't work for fish. You'll probably know people in here, you might fish, and there's folks that fished 5-10 years ago, so we catch all sorts of bass. And then about 4 years ago, said, where do the bass go? You saw the picture of all the mud And we got lots of mud in front of our place. And up to 2 years ago, I go out there every morning, September, October, and I'd pick up to 1,000 elliptial mussels and put them in a bucket because they're way away from the water. You can see their little tracks. They're trying to get to water. But you know, when you got a little tiny foot this big and you can go 20 feet, don't go very fast. And so it's not good. And so I pick them up and throw them in the water. This year, I found about 20 instead of thousands every day. I found about 20. That's terrible. And the same thing, like Dwayne was saying, in the winter, a lot of folks, I think I'll go out ice fishing. Well, watch out that when you put your digger down there, you don't, how many rocks you get when you get through the ice. 2 or 3 weeks ago, when it's all ice, well, maybe 1 week ago it was all ice, you could stand out there. The water has been up to 103 feet above mean low tide. So you might know the Grand Lake, it's measured like that. It's related to what the tide is below the dam. So we're usually between 103 and maybe about 94. So we have been up to 103, but now we're down to like 99. So add that up, it's like a 3-foot slope. So you could be at the edge of the lake and you would slowly slide towards the center of the lake. Now that's not good for mussels or anybody else living underneath the ice because the ice is flat, tight on the ground. That's not good. So can this be fixed? Well, it probably takes money. Does Brookfield have money? Look them up online. I know it's either 30 billion or 300 billion. We were in Ireland a few years ago. They own 19 wind farms in Ireland. They own almost every dam in Central and South America. Do they have money? They probably got a few extra bucks that could fix it. So that'd be really nice if they did. As far as safety, with the amount of muddy water out there, and if you've gone to try to put a boat in at the Grand Lake Dam, there's sometimes you might have like 6-7 inches of sand on the ramp trying to get down there, or trying to get out. They're supposed to take care of it. I take care of it once in a while. I'm like, they're supposed to take care of it. And in the water, you know how muddy it is, just because it's very silty. And so for safety-wise, if you want to be fishing, that's okay, because we're not going very fast, but if you want to be, I don't think anybody ever want to go water skiing. This time of year I go out and I take pictures of the high things on the ice, like the tree stumps will have a little hat on of ice, and the ledges will have a little thing of ice on top. So now's a good time to take pictures and go out there in the summer and say, I don't want to hit that. But there's a lot of things to hit. And so if we had a better bottom, if we had vegetation, if we had a livable edge, there's a good chance the lake would clear up nice. And if the lake cleared up nice, the river cleared up nice, and then Leonard Lake would clear up nice, and you could have fish if somebody would actually let them to get up. I've also taken pictures of, you might go right across from just above the dam, on the left-hand side as you're looking up at low tide. There's this little sandbar up there. Took a picture of 2 herring gulls. I was just happy as could be because there's a nice, used to be a 3-foot long eel, and now it's like a 2-foot long eel. So things could get better. There's money that somebody has that could get it better. I hope they do. Keep track of what's going on, and hopefully we'll have it better.
Dwayne, could you tell them our email and website address?
Well, you can Google us, Downeast Salmon Federation. If you want more information, if you want to reach out, make a donation online, you can see what we're up to, like our smelt fry, April 29th in Columbia Falls. The smelts that we're frying wouldn't be there if we hadn't actually removed the dam that we're parked on. So the piece of the dam that spilled water out onto the habitat where they spawn had been left in place when the dam was taken out years ago. So we took another section out. Now we've got all those eggs incubating. We can go hopefully forever. People can fish for smelts there and fry them. Come and celebrate with us. April 29th, Saturday afternoon, fish caught in Washington County that came as a result of stewardship that's been done by a lot of different partners involved with that. So that's, you can come and see our other facility in East Machias, which was built in a former Bangor Hydro power plant that they gave to us, and we rebuilt, put over $1 million into the building. And it's now a state-of-the-art salmon hatchery that's actually working better than some of the other approaches. And then we bought a dam in Whiting at the head of, just above the head of tide on the Orange River. Whiting's right where you would turn off Route 1 to go to Quebec. Little pond right there. And that dam is going to be rebuilt, but this time it's going to have a fishway. The first time in 80 years. So we took the initiative to go buy an old rundown dam, and nobody else wanted to touch. And we just took the chance on it. And the town worked with us, and the agencies and the various partners, fire department, and we came to the conclusion, okay, the pond's got to stay, the dam's got to stay, but at least it's going to have a state-of-the-art fishway. So when you go by there, probably within a year and a half, probably not this construction season, next year, there should be a fishway there. And then that water should start to get fishways up above as well.
Dwayne, if Brookfield does not get relicensed, then do they just walk away and leave that 60-foot mass? So what would happen if they don't?
They're not allowed to just walk away, so they would have to invest in a plan that FERC would lay out for them. So a decommissioning plan, so-called. So they can't just walk.
So they either have to pay for the decommissioning or pay for new state-of-the-art fish passage.
Or work with a partner who's willing to split the difference.
Right.
And that's what happened on the Penobscot Trust. So the Penobscot Trust worked with the dam owners in that case. And actually, this would be the best time in U.S. history to do something like this because we have something called, the infrastructure bill. NOAA Fisheries has 10 times the amount of money that it's ever had before for things like fishways and dam removals. They are talking with Brookfield, saying, hey, if you want, we're over here. And you could go through DSF or some other NGO. You could even go through the state of Maine to do this. So they have a few different ways that they could.
Any idea which is cheaper, to decommission or to put a state-of-the-art fish passage?
Cheaper to decommission.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
But it's not going to produce funds for them for the next 40 years like a license would.
Right, but they said this was a site they didn't really like, so.
We'll find out how much they like it. So far, that since they haven't had to make any changes for the last 10 years under this new licensing process, they've been generating, no doubt, a lot of electricity and revenue. So they seem to like it right now.
But our job is to make them like it last.
Right. I think it's working.
Yeah.
Make the shoe pinch.
Yeah.
And we're trying to do that for the benefit of the ecosystem and the communities. But again, Graham Lake, we believe, needs to stay, and that there needs to be a new owner, maybe a new owner for that, if Brookfield isn't interested.
A lot of people on Graham Lake that are scared silly that game is going to go.
Yeah.
If you could come up with something concrete that people on the lake could look at, say, hey, this makes sense, but
yeah,
it sounds pretty vague.
There are some examples in Maine. I can't pull them off the top of my head, but you might remember some of them. There's one in particular where I think 4 towns got together. It was an old industrial mill. There was a dam, there was a lake, and the 4 communities got together. It's in southern Maine. I can't remember the name of the pond. But they got together and they said, okay, we'll take it. It's so important to our communities that we feel that, it's worth it. Does that mean that, and I think actually there's a little bit of a surcharge to those shorefront owners that you kick in a little more and we'll guarantee that we maintain that lake level and so on. So there are some examples, and I can try to dig some up if you send me an email. Mark.
Are you thinking of Centerback Lake on the St. George?
No, but that might be another example.
That's a really good example,
It's
though.
in the Androscoggin, I think.
Okay. So on the St. George, you know, there was a situation like this. There was a dam. It was falling apart. There was talk about taking it out, and the owners, you know, didn't want that. And so what happened is that they did take the dam out, but they replaced it with a rock ramp. And so they put in sheet piling at different levels, stepping it down. So the water goes over the dam and it goes down these falls, basically. And the center sheet piling was driven in further than the ones on either side. So you have a low flow channel. So in the summer, when there isn't much water, instead of going over the dam, you know, that deep, there's water going over the dam that's in this channel. It's deep enough for fish to move. And it's now, so the dam, because it's a permanent feature, it's filled with stone. It's going to be there forever. It maintains the level of the lake at that level or a little bit higher, depending on how much rain you actually get. So the camp owners on Centerback Lake were really happy. They got what they wanted. The fish got what they wanted. They had fish passage, and the fishermen just love it because the best fishing in the area is right at the bottom of where the dam is. So there's a big pool down there, and it's a favorite place to hang out. So that's the sort of thing that could be done on the Union River. And there's a number of instances like that. So in that case, the dam did come out, but it had to be replaced with something. And the Grand Lake Dam, is in terrible shape. The reason why they took the road, why they closed the road over it, was that the road was falling into the water. And so that dam may not be able to stay.
As is, until somebody invests in it. And that's, I think, right where Brookfield is. Why invest right now until you know what the game is going to be for the next 40 years? And then you make a decision, and if you don't like it, then you turn to NOAA or the non-governmental groups and say, okay, now we're ready to talk seriously. But there are examples. So the other example that is here in Maine, if you give me your email address, one of our friends, Paul Bizolka, lives on that lake, and he told the story of how that was worked out there.
It's also important to remember in this case, like Mark mentioned a falling down dam, a lot of, like Leslie's found his dams probably falling down at a certain point in time. This one has an owner who's legally required to take care of it, even in decommissioning. So where I think the responsibility lies is maybe not necessarily on Dwayne and DSF to have the idea. It's on everybody who's connected to the resource to be pushing what they need out there in the state. Because if the state and the feds are seeing this project not licensed, but then they see that there's this big community that wants there to be a dam there, for example, then when they go through that process of when Brookfield, if they were to say, we're not going to run this anymore, they would be able to hold them and say, well, you may not get a license, but you have to do these things in your departure, whether you like it or not, and then they'll fund it. But if they don't know that's the case, and that's through just being involved, and again, like I don't know if it falls on Salmon Federation to be the sole kind of carrier of that, which should, I think it's everybody. So
we're willing to help to the extent we can to try to get information to you around some of these questions. Like I said, I can call Paul Bizolka in a moment and I'll figure out what lake that is, but I can't right now. So, yeah, I guess I don't have any further points. I don't know if other people have other questions. Definitely feel free to reach out. Don't hesitate, and we'll try to get information if we can find it for you. I'll tell you who the Brookfield CEO is if you want that number.
Thank you.
And prizes for everybody who stuck around.